Hello. Welcome to another edition of the Daily Friends Show. I'm your host, Nicholas Lorimer. And firstly, I must apologize. There is definitely going to be construction noise from my end today. I will try to keep it to a minimum, but I apologize if it interrupts your listening or viewing experience. Today, I'm joined by Mr. Hermann Pretorius. Hermann, how are you doing?
Hi, I'm doing okay. I just want to warn everyone that from my side, equally disconcerting, there will be the sound of my voice.
Excellent. And of course, Mr. Tiego Thotse. Tiego, how are you doing, man?
I'm doing great, thanks. And how are you, Nick? Good afternoon.
I'm pretty good. I'm in the middle of moving, so I'm a little bit frazzled and stressed, but that's not the problem of our audience. All right, let's get on to our first story. And this is some news.
What do you and the Cinema Nouveau film have in common?
Tell me, Herman, what do we have in common?
A moving experience.
You know, Herman, if I had someone waiting in the wings, I'd kick you off the podcast right now. But, that's
fair
just
enough.
Anyway, so we've got some news from Eskom, which is former acting Eskom CEO. I mean, firstly, can I just say, this is one of those many examples you see in South African life of someone in a very senior position being an acting whatever, because the actual appointment system hasn't been done. Anyway, former acting Eskom CEO Matshela Koko has been arrested along with his wife and stepdaughter in connection with a multi-billion rand tender awarded to a German conglomerate ABB at Kusile Power Station. So according to the charge sheet, the charges against him, his wife and stepdaughter, as well as one of his friends, stem from a 2015 contract awarded to this German company to install control and instrumentation systems at the power plant in Mpumalanga. While the official charge sheet has not been public, News 24 has published a report on this. It was a 2 billion rand contract after the work was taken away from Siemens, who originally got the contract to begin with. Siemens had a subcontractor who wasn't able to complete the work, or was alleged to have not completed some work, and therefore this threatened to delay the project. And so this was used as an excuse to remove the project from their hands and give it to this company, which the former CEO was connected to. The awarding of the contract was allegedly manipulated, according to the charges, with some of the employees accused of colluding with Koko to ensure that it appointed a certain subcontractor who his stepdaughter is connected to undertake some of the cabling work, while knowing that this subcontractor was not actually qualified to finish the work. So there's a whole lot more details to the story. I suggest if you guys are interested, you can go check that out. But charges that have been laid against him range from corruption to conspiracy to money laundering, and each of them is going to take quite a big, it's probably going to be quite a big deal by itself. So, Herman, first let's start with you. I think good news. It's always good when someone actually gets charged with something. I presume he's going to be charged, even though it's not public yet. And what do you make of what you think this says about Eskom when, a former CEO? It perhaps explains why Kusile and Medupi power plants are not doing so great.
Yeah, no, I mean, it is, of course, welcome. I mean, in South Africa, the bar is so low that even just the whiff of accountability or prosecution is to be welcomed. One can insert multiple qualifiers here. I, for one, would look at but that's just cynical, political me. I would look at the timing of this with regards to the ANC conference in 2 months' time, or in a month's time almost. I would look at the fact that President Ramaphosa has been unable to really get a grip on any of his opponents, people moving against him, people with interests moving against him. So prosecution, yeah, but I do suspect that this isn't. It's not just a good faith we're going to prosecute him. That said, it is welcome. It is welcome. I, for one, have been, like most South Africans, have been incredibly frustrated by the National Prosecuting Authority having the billions and billions and billions of pages of the Zondo report without it really getting anywhere. I mean, to open an investigation, you you need prima facie evidence, and boom, you're off. Then you can actually investigate and get
we
your
have so much of that.
Yes. So I mean, that's been very, very frustrating. But it is, I mean, some prosecution for people who got us into this mess is better than no prosecution for the people who got us into this mess. However, part of the problem here is that we should ask what made this level of corruption possible? What made state capture possible? And there's no way of getting away from the fact that it was stuff like rigged procurement processes, black economic empowerment, the massive misnomer of the century. It should actually stand for blatant elite enrichment. And then we, of course, have cadre deployment. These things aren't incidental to state capture. They are state capture. The moment you see this sort of corruption, 14.7 billion, I think Justice Zondo mentioned the figure connected to Koko and Singh and so on with Gupta deals. These things didn't fall out of the sky. These things were used, or the frameworks, the legislative and regulatory frameworks set in place to give flesh in terms of active policy to cadre deployment, rig procurement processes, BEE. Those are the channels through which this poison flowed. And until those channels are, addressed, tied off, and properly screwed tight forever, I wouldn't be too celebratory about any prosecutions, because this is at best, it's like a Miprodol for a cancer patient.
Yeah, that's better than no Miprodol. So I'm thinking, you mentioned state capture, and I want to talk a little bit about the history of the term state capture, right? State capture, I think, was first really used in a big way, at least that I can remember, by Helen Zille, actually. But she wasn't talking about the Guptas taking control of the state. She was talking about the ANC blurring the line between the party and the state to the point where the independent bureaucracy, the independent systems of government were all loyal to the party because cadres, through cadre deployment, using the cover of BEE, often had taken place. And it's kind of interesting how that term state capture sort of got stolen from under her and then turned into this kind of far more, I don't know what to call it, less systemic problem maybe, of describing a story where a couple of businessmen colluded with a couple of politicians to capture the state. And I think that really blurs what is the real problem here, and that is the structural policies of BEE and cadre deployments. Tiego, what do you make of this whole mess?
Well, first and foremost, I must say that it's always hard coming after Hermann. He covers everything and leaves you with nothing to say. Well, yeah, that's the first point, that I agree with everything.
I'll let you go first next time then, Tiego.
Yeah, I agree with everything that Hermann has said. I agree with what you just said as well, Nick. I think this is more of a systematic crisis than anything else. I mean, there are, as Hermann has said, as you put it, certain laws, certain policies are put in place that allow for these things to take place. It's not a coincidence that we wake up and such things are possible. People are able to just still do 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. It's laws that enable them.
It's not like everyone just suddenly got more greedy during the Zuma era.
Yeah. Human beings naturally can be greedy. So what matters is whether or not you create systems to deal with that greed or not. So the ANC has deliberately not been bringing into government laws that stop corruption properly. They've deliberately kept laws, policies that would allow for people in government to continue doing what they're doing. But this should definitely be welcomed, I reckon. And I hope that after this, they will go after more people who the state capture report says that were involved in corruption. But I think even further, moving forward, I hope that the NPA will move into municipalities, departments, everywhere else, and run after everyone else who's doing this, from people who are really employees at the low level, those in middle, those at the top, all of them. I reckon the NPA should go after, because really this is something that happens not just at the national scale, not just at Eskom. It happens at our immediate municipalities. I saw in this particular story, that initially the 2 billion contract was given to a particular company. Afterwards, it was taken from that company and allocated to, is it AAB, right? And allocated ABB and allocated to ABB. What normally happens, at least at local government level, what we see and witness at local government level is that they'll bring someone in. If that person does not give them what they want, they find a way of taking them out. And what they'll normally do is to frustrate. Say there's a subcontractor, like there was in this instance, and the subcontractor does an amount of work. They deliberately frustrate you and not pay you for that work. Then you don't have capital to continue. That way they take you out. So they master the system. They master the system. And yeah, let's hope that the NPA will continue going after them. But this is certainly welcomed.
I want to add something there to what Tiego has said. When we see political assassinations and killings, Tiego was talking very much in terms of a business sense, that you can be put out of business. But when we talk about the consequences of state capture, of cadre deployment, of these procurement perversions, you will quite often see a money trail behind it. I mean, it's not by accident that the assassination of Obita Deokaran happened with regards to procurement corruption. This is what happens when a criminal organization gets control of the state. It is a mafia and a mafiosi type organization at every level: construction, service delivery, even transport. All of these aspects have been affected by a form of increasing political violence. Why? Because procurement has become the thing to chase. It's no longer just an issue, as it used to be, of that councillor or that councillor is now at risk. This is filtering through the entire system. And I do think the game was, was it Pule Mabe who said the other day, who said the quiet part out loud, when someone from the ANC, I think it might have been Mabe, suggested that the government pay the salaries of ANC workers when the ANC couldn't afford it. That was the quiet bit out loud. It makes it clear what they actually think about the resources and who has a right to it. So this issue of state capture, we must never think Zondo encapsulated. We must never think a few prosecutions of high-flying shysters like Koko will bring an end to it. This is a systemic rot, and it goes to the heart of the ANC. And as long as the laws that allowed it to happen remain on the statute books, it is a chill that South Africa will not be able to shake.
Well said. All right, let's move on to our next one. And I'm afraid I'm going to let Herman go first again here, because we are talking once again about British politics. I think this is probably the last time we're going to talk about it for a while, unless something crazy happens, which, knowing British politics these days, is not impossible. So we saw, I think the last time we talked about it was just before, like a few minutes even before Liz Truss resigned, making her Britain's shortest serving prime minister by a long shot. And she has now been replaced by the person that she ran against in the Conservative Party of the UK's internal leadership in the lead up to her being appointed prime minister, which is Rishi Sunak, who was for a time Chancellor of the Exchequer in the UK. Herman, what can we expect from Rishi Sunak? What does he have any chance of rescuing the Tories from the position they're in? Currently, they continue to poll, although there's been a little bit of improvement at very terrible levels against Labour. Labour, I think in the last poll I saw, had over 50% support, whereas the Conservatives were down at about 23, which is a shocking number for them, and would see most of their seats wiped out in Parliament, and Labour securing a very healthy majority. Are the Conservatives destined for the opposition benches?
I think so. I really don't see a way out of this for them. I think the best Sunak can possibly hope for is a respectable loss in what we expect to be the 2024 general election, for a few reasons. Number one, this would be the fifth election from which the Conservative Party would seek a governing mandate. If we look at 2010, They won, became the biggest party, went into coalition with the Liberal Democrats. 2015, won an outright majority against all odds, surprising everyone. 2017, Theresa May lost that majority, but clung to power through a deal with some of the Northern Irish seats, minority government, until December 2019, where Boris Johnson wins a majority of 80 plus. The 2024 election will require an unprecedented electoral success in British politics, in modern British politics, as far as I'm aware. I don't know of any government that has gone on to, quote unquote, win 5 elections in a row. Now, of course, 2010 and 2017, they did not technically win the majority, but they still became the largest party and received the closest thing to a mandate to govern compared to any other party. So that's the first question, is they've just had history against them. Number 2, there's a similar instance of the total collapse of the Tory reputation for sound economic management. And that happened in 1992 with Black Wednesday. That was when the British pound, just a bit of history, when monetary union, the euro, was being discussed from the late 80s onwards to the actual founding of the euro in 1999, there was constantly this political question of whether the pound sterling, the British currency, will be abolished in favor of the euro. Now, a part of dipping the toes in the water of this experiment, how that would work, the Major government followed the Thatcher Conservative government, John Major, who was her chancellor and also foreign secretary at the time, managed Britain. I think it might have even happened under Thatcher, under Nigel Lawson, connected the British pound to the ERM, the exchange rate mechanism of the European Union, or the Eurozone, whatever. Then suddenly the British pound crashed to a value that forced the British government to extract it from the ERM. And Black Wednesday ensued. There was a run on the pound weakened significantly, similar as to what we saw in the last few weeks, where the pound weakened. Pension funds became worried or affected by market worry about the cost of debt. All manner of credit mechanisms, especially with regards to the housing market, was shaken by these market jitters. And the Tories had 5 years to re-establish economic competence between 1992 and 1997. And while the economy improved, they never recovered. Tony Blair won 418 seats in the 1997 election, a massive majority of 179 seats. Now, the crash economically of the Trussonomics disaster isn't of the same scale as crashing out of the exchange rate mechanism. Of course not. But it did tank the Tories' reputation for sound economic policy. On every single area of policy, according to the latest data, the British people now favour the Labour Party. That's even on stuff like law and order and the economy, stuff on which the Tories were supposed to be strong. The challenge is, for Rishi Sunak, is he doesn't have 5 years. He has 2 years at best. And during those 2 years, he's got a war in Ukraine, inflation we might not have seen the last of. We're heading into the British winter with an energy crisis. And the problem is he doesn't have the command over his party that Boris Johnson might have had because he, quote unquote, didn't win the 2019 election. Now, one can quibble about the constitutionalities of who gets an electoral mandate. But Sunak, whilst in a stronger position than Truss, is definitely in a weaker position than Johnson. And I think a massive success for him would be keeping the Conservative Party above 250 seats come the next election.
I must say, though, that despite everything that's been going on and all the fun that's been made of the Brits, including by me, I am endlessly just feel good every time I think about the fact that there is a country where politicians resign. They could have forced Truss out with a vote of no confidence. They could have forced Johnson out with a vote of no confidence. Boris, even compared to, I think, the standards of other British politicians, actually probably hung on for longer than usual. And yet, he still resigned. And Tiego, I think you'd agree with me that would be a very welcome thing in South Africa. What's your take on all this?
Well, I think it would certainly be a welcome thing in South Africa, but it's likely something that's not about to happen. We have a crisis in South Africa whereby people go into politics because they see politics as an economic path, a way that could take them out of poverty, getting up there and stuff of that nature. So that's a crisis that we have in South Africa. Whereas in many progressive countries, you have a lot of people who are going into politics, being people who have already created wealth for themselves and everything of that nature, and really just want to contribute towards developing the economy and stuff of that nature. So we don't have much of that in South Africa. So a lot of people tend to not want to resign. Plus, in South Africa, we have a lot of politicians in South Africa love boosting with power. They tend to think that power in government automatically becomes power in their personal lives. They use political power to sort of build an esteem for themselves and stuff of that nature. And yeah,
And we see that in all the bodyguards and the entourages and the
and how they carry themselves. You see politicians going to, say, rural areas, townships, how they talk to the people there. They act like messiahs of some sort. They are messiahs of some sort. So they enjoy that very much. And yeah, that's a crisis we have in South Africa. Yeah.
But one thing that is worth noting is that the system worked. It's not nice. It's messy, and it was embarrassing, and the Tories should feel embarrassed. But the British system worked. It is meant to be a parliamentary democracy. They got rid of an awful leader who, by the way, didn't have to be awful. This was the greatest political government-owned goal of a British government since the Suez Crisis in 1956. Completely unnecessary. But the point is, the system worked. In our country, we see something quite different. And perhaps at a later stage, or we've talked about it before, we can look at the recommendations of one Raymond Zondo, where he wants to make the presidency directly elected by the electorate. Now, how that will solve the problem of gnats clinging to power, and with that I spell it with a G, G-N-A-T-S, but you can take away the G and it still rings true in South Africa. I just don't see it. But there's something to be learned from a system, messy as it is. The pressure valve let the pressure out, and the engine is running.
Indeed. Also, I can say that I have a very general rule for politics, which is no matter how good a political party is or how closely I agree with them, I think they should lose power every now and again, because otherwise you become a bit useless and silly. I think the Tories have reached that stage in the UK. But in South Africa, we haven't just reached that stage. We've lapped that stage. And the ANC definitely needs to go out of power so that it can have some time to reflect on perhaps some of the mistakes it's made.
In fact, we're so past that stage, it's almost time to get the ANC back in power.
Yeah. Oh, heaven forbid. Anyway, okay, let us go on to our next topic, and we are coming once again back to SA here. And this follows a warning that originally came out from the US Embassy, but I think was followed up by confirmation, a similar message from the UK Embassy in South Africa, saying that they urged all of their diplomatic staff to stay away from Sandton, particularly from any large gathering events this weekend, as they were worried that there may be the possibility. They've received intelligence that there may be a terrorist attack planned somewhere in Sandton this weekend. Very worrying, particularly because the UK and the US have very large intelligence networks and are very focused on counterterrorism. So they often have quite good intel on this stuff. They didn't say what they thought the target could be, but we know that there's a gay pride parade march in Sandton this weekend. And I believe that the Tigrayan and Ethiopian governments are also having negotiations for peace negotiations as well at the same time. So maybe that's also a target. Who knows? What struck me about this, though, is just the sort of statement from the South African government with regards to this. Firstly, it's weird to be warned about a terror attack by foreign governments who are officially only warning their own citizens, actually, rather than us. But the South African reply was, the South African government has noted the warning of the threat issued by the US Embassy about possible terror attacks And then went on to say, quote, "It is the responsibility of the South African security forces to ensure that all people within our country feel safe. We are working hard at keeping our nation and our people safe. We continue to monitor the threats to our citizens, nation, and sovereignty. Threats are assessed continuously and are acted upon to ensure the safety of all." That is like a generic copy-paste statement that you could just get from anywhere. Is the threat credible? Should South Africans take note? What? I don't know. Tiego, what do you make of all this?
Well, we've said this before a lot of times, that these people don't know what they're doing. We have an intelligence led by people who are not at all intelligent. They really don't know what they're doing. There's not much to say around this. They really don't know what they're doing. But more than anything, it's embarrassing that in South Africa, where we have an intelligence department that should be making citizens aware of such things of this nature, alerts of this nature when they do come up, there is no alert. Foreign countries, the US and the UK, should be the ones alerting us to these things. But even when they have alerted, government doesn't seem to understand the agency of dealing with this thing, or going to the citizens and saying such a thing might happen, and so look after yourselves or something like that. They did not even give us a take care of yourself message, nothing of that nature. They are hopeless. They are hopeless. We must make the right choices come 2024, I think, on my part. That's all I'll say for now.
I think one of the other aspects of this is that, for a while, South Africa has let its intelligence services and its army atrophy. And now we really are beginning to see local problems that are arising, namely, I would say, ISIS in northern Mozambique, who are quite a serious threat, in which the South African army is not currently well equipped to deal with or to assist in dealing with when they're helping the Mozambican government. And also, as far as Tiego points out, our intelligence services, I'm pretty sure all they do is spy on other factions of the ANC. So it is a bit concerning that we kind of have this gap in our state's competence, and this is a core state competence. I'm not really sure now, how, if there's anything we can really do about it. What do you make of this?
Well, at this stage, I want to thank Ebrahim Patel for, at a crucial point of danger to our country, determining the degree of cooked chicken we could eat. At the same time, I want to ask, we could spend time on that. What happened here? But you know what's worse? You know what's actually quite worse here? One of two things happened. One is a charitable interpretation of events, and South Africa, the South African state, comes out looking like, an idiot, and then the less charitable one isn't much different in outcome. Either U.S. intelligence alerted South African intelligence about this, as is habit, as is practice in international communications and international relations, that you alert the country where a security threat is identified. Either they alerted them, and then the South African services said, and this is the charitable interpretation, how about you announce it because we are not credible? Or the other one is that they probably tried to inform South Africa's intelligence services, and
no one answered the phone or the emails.
Yes. Or the system was down. So whatever happened here, the failure is embarrassing. It's catastrophic. And there's no to get back to corruption and that sort of nonsense, the cadre deployment, the absence of merit-based appointment. Now, it's a bit of a stretch to, in a few seconds, get from merit-based appointments to terror threats. But hear me out. The South African passport is one of the most valuable terrorist commodities in the international black market because it is so easily accessible. Why is it easily accessible? Because you could either bribe one out of a Home Office official, or you can just break in and steal the equipment. The point is, whatever, there's a meritocratic vacuum that makes our passport, well, until relatively recently, when international intelligence communities responded to this issue, the South African passport is a terror asset because of the incompetence of our state, and the state is incompetent because of things like cadre deployment and BEE and rig procurement processes. So we've gone full circle. And if someone dies in Sandton, let it be noted for the record that that person would have died because of state incompetence, not a terror threat. These threats are managed every day, And I'm not de-agentifying the evil bastards doing these things. But any death that comes in Sandton on this day would have been a preventable one if we had a state that knew its arse from its elbow.
Indeed. As for the idea that the South African government didn't think that the threat was credible, and therefore that's why they're not taking it seriously. Yeah, I would not trust our intelligence services to be correct about that in the slightest. But anyway, we are out of time. I think that is all we have to talk about today. Thank you very much, gentlemen. Thank you, everyone, for listening, and we will see you next week on the Daily Friend Show. I hope you all have a fantastic, wonderful weekend, and have a good one. Cheers, everyone.